If you can't hear, I'm going to start shouting. Hopefully you can hear me. It's not that big a room. Thanks for coming tonight. I know it's a beautiful night and the beer's free, but I'm glad you're here. Valhalla will be open at the end of the talk as well. I just wanted to announce a couple of things. This is our last Spaceport lecture of the season. We'll start again in the fall. We're looking for some good people. I'm also open to ideas, but don't be upset if we don't take them right away. So, topics or speakers, just feel free to contact us and we can put it in the ledger and see how we go. There's a couple of other events I want to announce to you. Sorry, for those of you who don't know me, my name is David Alexander. I'm the director of the Space Institute, and we kind of run this program with sponsorship from the Houston Spaceport. Most of the space people are up in Colorado right now, including Arturo Machuca, who's our sponsor, so I'll just thank him in absentia. On Saturday, if you have a middle school girl, we have the Reach for the Stars STEM Festival, which used to be known as the Sally Ride Festival, for those of you who might remember those. It's still done in conjunction with the Ride family. And so that's a kind of all-day event, but it's mostly for middle school girls. So if you've interest in that, you can I think you can still get tickets when you show up at the door. On Sunday, there is an observatory open house at our physics building on the 4th floor there. This is a free open event. Professor Chris Johns-Kroll will do a little introductory talk, and I think the weather's supposed to be okay, and so you'll be able to look through the telescope and see cool stuff. And then on the 28th, a week on Saturday, we're having Space Day at the Rice baseball game. We're actually having a STEM event, science, technology, engineering, math event in the morning for a bunch of school kids. And then the game starts with, I think, unless she backs out again, but our kids won't let her, the acting director of the Johnson Space Center, Melanie Saunders, is going to throw the first pitch. She's probably practicing right now. We're going to have some space-themed activities. Destination Station is going to be there, which is a big traveling NASA exhibit, which is really exciting. Practice your moonwalks, because there's going to be a moonwalk camp, so you have to pretend that you're walking on the moon. There should be a lot of fun. There's a couple of trivia questions too, which I'm sure most of you will all get right. There's one hard one. So anyway, I hope you can join us. So that'll be the 28th over at Reckland Park. And I think if you remember all those, you'll do well. But if you look at the rsi.rice.edu website, we'll be posting information about those events. You're all welcome, and hopefully we'll see you at Rice again. So it's really great to have somebody like Brian here for tonight's talk. For those of you who come very regularly, there's lots of different things we talk about space. We have a lot of NASA people, we have astronauts, we have so on, the science folks and the engineers. But in order to actually know what it's like to get to space and what you need to do to make those astronauts survive, you actually have to go through the motions and learn what you can and do all that kind of science. And so NASA has this really cool program that I won't spoil by talking about it, because Brian's going to talk about that as one of the crew members of that. So we're really excited to have that to close out our season. So we really thank you for agreeing to come. So Brian is a writer, traveler, and engineer with experience in international development and human space exploration. He has a bachelor's degree in biomedical and electrical engineering from the University of Rhode Island, and a master's degree in space studies from the International Space University, which I've actually taught at. Is a really cool thing. And he's currently in training to be a flight controller for the International Space Station, and has worked around the world, including Rwanda, Nicaragua, and Hawaii. He shares his experience through blogs, podcasts, and talks, and Spaceport lectures. So please join me in welcoming Brian Ramos.
So that was a cool introduction. That made me feel way cooler than it. So starting off, I want everybody in the room to take a minute, and I want you to imagine that you can't separate any aspect of your life. So imagine that you go into work or go to your class, and perhaps your mom is sitting next to you and asking you about how your project's going. And then maybe you drive home, and your boss is at your dinner table, waiting for you to cook, and so you can sit down and eat dinner together. And then you want to unwind, so you go to a movie with your doctor or your mechanic. And then you guys all go into your separate rooms, fall asleep, and then wake up and do it again. And then I forgot to mention your movie theater, your gym, your place of business, your dining room are all the same location. So how many people would sign up for that? No hand. Oh, there we go. All right, we got one little knee like me. Okay, well I did, and I'm here to tell you about it. Sort of. So before we go into it, a little bit about myself. As mentioned, I have an engineering background in biomedical engineering and electrical engineering with a master's from the International Space University. So ISU, that university focuses on the 3 I's principle: international, interdisciplinary, and intercultural. So basically we're looking at, they take people from all different parts of the country, or all different parts of different countries, bring us all together, put us on teams, and have us try to figure out how do you work with people that maybe have a different sense of how to conduct business, different culture, different languages, different disciplines even, not just engineers, but we have political scientists and business people. And then I went on to work in international development. So I worked in a few different countries, figuring out how to bridge some of those cultural gaps in Rwanda and Nicaragua, fixing medical equipment. And then that afforded me some interesting opportunities. I was able to go with a team to represent our school at a United Nations COPUS meeting in Austria. And then in addition, I do some writing and outreach, something that I think is pretty important. That's why I like to give these talks and have nice people like you guys to come out and listen to them. So before we get into exactly our analog, our high seas analog, we have to think about, why do we have analogs at all? And so when we're thinking about going to Mars, going to another planet, you have new challenges, right? If you go to Mars, you're looking at vast differences that add all these new challenges that we don't normally have. Things like communication delays, or the need for increased crew autonomy we talk about, right? The crew has to do more things on their own. They have to be able to fix problems on their own because they can't have that direct connection. And so analogs, all these different analogs are popping up to try to figure out what are these problems in the first place? What are some of the stressors and the changes? And how do we deal with them? And all of them really come down to one basic question. What's life like when Earth is far away? One of these is high seas, and this is the one that I did. So high seas is primarily a psychological study. So they want to see if we go nuts, and you guys can let me know at the end if I did or not. You'll be the judge. We're passing around a survey, maybe, I don't know. But they're looking at things like individual stress levels. How stressed do we get over time? How does that change with what point we are in the mission? How does the team stress level change and the team dynamics change over time? We're looking at creating and testing mitigations. So if we understand what the stresses are, if we introduce this project, this research, does that help, right? And then our mission specifically also focused on astronaut selection. So they were looking at, how do we select a crew for Mars? How do we select the perfect group of people, right? Do you want this kind of personality, this mix of personalities, this mix of professional backgrounds? How do you want to conduct your crew? What's going to be the best combination of people that are going to be able to go there, accomplish their mission, and then also come back as healthy people, right? And then our PI, the main researcher of the project, always says her primary goal is to have 6 people go in the habitat and 6 people come out of the habitat. Not 5, not 7. Okay? Which we did. We were okay. Yeah. It's just the first one. That's all. You'll notice here, so this picture is in Hawaii, where the simulation is. You can see Mauna Kea in the back. Where the picture is taken from is our volcano, Honolulu. And you might ask, well, why Hawaii? And part of it is that there are geological similarities to Mars. So these are a couple of pictures that we took with a drone. And you can see that, in some places it looks pretty alien. You can start seeing some different lava flows, the minerals in the lava flow and how turbulent they were when they cooled, things like that will affect how they look. And it can look like a different place. So our mission specifically was High Seas Mission 5. We were the 5th mission. We're going to have 6 crew members who would be in this dome, living in this dome for 8 months on the slopes of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, as I said. And sometimes people ask, well, what are the qualifications getting in? And how serious are these people? Because they're volunteers, right? And so I want to give you a sense of that. So our team, I thought, is pretty incredible. We had one individual who was a Google programmer. We have one lady who works on, or worked on Indy 500 race cars. We have a man who does astrobiology research in these mines underneath the Northern Sea. We have a guy from SpaceX. We have a gentleman who's doing his PhD in DNA manipulation. And we have one guy that got picked solely for his handsome looks. So I thought, I don't know, I think they did a pretty good job.
Why is he not?
How could you lose? So, outside of those looks and those professional backgrounds, we also, and what we bring in, we also had crew roles. And so, commander is one of them, obviously a very important one. And mine was actually a health and performance officer. So I was in charge of medical equipment, make sure we had, what we needed. I was in charge of things like designing emergency EVAs. So if somebody gets hurt on the field, what do we do? If somebody gets stuck in a lava tube cave, what do we do? We also did coordination. I also did coordination with the doctors. So we had psychological support. We had an MD. So different individuals that the crew could reach out to. So I was in charge of coordinating all that. So anything related to crew health, basically. So you might ask, okay, you're sitting in this bubble. What are you doing? What is it that we're doing here? I tried to pick the most awkward picture I could. I hope I succeeded. The answer to that is research. We're doing a lot of research. Mostly we're researching ourselves. So we do weird stuff like wake up early in the morning and kind of just slog downstairs and you start dribbling into a tube because you're collecting spit samples. Or you collect hair samples. Because the researchers will take that, measure the cortisol levels in them, and be able to figure out how stressed we were and how that changes over time. We had watches to monitor our sleep activity. We had sociometric badges that would keep track of how close we were to one another, how loud our voices were. So you can see, okay, are people spending less time together? Is this person isolating themselves? Like, what's going on? Are they yelling? So they can get a lot of data on our behavior between that and our surveys. We had a lot of puzzles, a lot of crew challenges where we would, try to figure something out, and they can monitor our performance. They can monitor the language that we're using in this particular case, and how that changes and how that how the lexicon changes the performance. Lots and lots of surveys every day. So in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, lots and lots of surveys to kind of give them feedback as to what is going on in the habitat each day and how that's changing. I don't want to be the person that has to go through all of those. There's a lot. In addition to that research, we have geological research, and we'll talk more about this later, but flying drones, we have geological challenges that we have to go out and figure out different things about the surrounding landscape, about our home. We also have opportunistic research, so research that comes from other places. This one's called the mini LHR, so this is out of NASA Goddard. And so this is actually monitoring atmospheric changes, and so we'd have to go out on EVA, out in our suits, and turn it on, turn it off, collect the data, and then send that back to them. Then in addition to all the things that we're assigned to do throughout the day, we have our own personal research that we bring in. Anything from DNA manipulation to resource utilization. My two projects were, I worked on a CO2 scrubbing device. It's a miniaturized CO2 scrubbing device for spacesuits to try to make it more compact. And then I also did 3D printing. And 3D printing is kind of a, has kind of a buzzword when associated with long duration missions. And the reason is because you're out there, you don't have a lot to do, or you don't have a lot that you can do in terms of getting materials. And so being able to manufacture your own things is very, very useful. And so you see some examples of some of the things that we've done. We have some parts for the clinosat. You can see a test tube holder here. Some of the ones that I was pretty proud of, we made a part for the veggie system. So the system is, we actually have one on orbit on the ISS for growing vegetables. We have a piece here for mounting a 360-degree camera on a drone. And then it's not all work stuff, right? So we can manufacture what we need. And so sometimes making something for play was equally as important. If you could make something that's going to improve somebody's life, or it's going to, do something that maybe wouldn't be practical to ask to be sent up, but we can manufacture there, it's a good opportunity to do so. So we have a capo there for ukulele that Okay, so now we get to the fun stuff, the constraints. And what I propose to everybody here is that my life inside of the bubble, inside of the habitat, was not that different from yours outside here. And so we'll go through each one of these and we'll talk about them a little bit. So we're talking about communication delays. We're in an isolated and confined environment. We have to manage our resources very well, and we get a resupply every 2 months. So first we'll talk about isolation. So this is a picture I like that we took of the drone. I enjoy it for a couple of reasons. One, you can really see that we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but a lot of different lava fields and lava types to go out and explore. You can see all the crew members. So we have 2 crew members on EDA here, just trekking through this little lava channel, or not so little when you're down there. You have 2 crew members and myself here flying the drone over one of the craters on the ridge. And then we have our dome here where we're living the rest of the time, and the other 2 crew members are in there. And we'd be talking to one of them over the radios to make sure we're okay. And the interesting thing about, one of the times we felt physically isolated pretty strongly was we had a storm. Right? Somebody was asking about this earlier. We had a storm, and it knocked out our communication, primary communication, our backup communications. We had absolutely none. So we could work the problem on our side as best we could. And then at the end of the day, you were really reliant on the fact that the ground support would notice there was a problem, go and look for that problem, and then be able to fix it and reestablish communication. So not only could you not communicate to do your work, you couldn't tell anybody there was a problem. Right? So it has those added challenges. One of the times that really struck me was actually using virtual reality. And so one of the organizations gave us virtual reality in the hopes that it would help with doing things like feeling that you're in an open space or feeling ties to Earth, let's say. And so the first time I put on this VR headset, I'm in the Bavarian Alps all of a sudden. And I'm looking around, and there's trees, and there's a car that drives by, different things. And then I see a person loading things into a truck. And all of a sudden I get all these weird questions I hadn't asked myself in a very long time. Right? Should I wave? Am I looking at him too long? Do I look weird? How's my hair? Is it okay? No, really, is it okay? Right? All these questions that I remember that I had forgotten what it was like to see a stranger. And so it's all of these questions that go through your head all the time, just dealing with people in society and being a person, that you really start feeling the effects of it after a few months. But that being said, I really felt isolated there. As a matter of fact, emotional isolation was really where the problem was. Anytime I felt emotionally isolated from my crew, either if they weren't available, maybe somebody was angry at me, or had a bond that I wasn't really a part of that had kind of broken off from the group, right? And I say this because everybody in this room, or most people in this room, have been isolated at one point or another, or felt isolated, right? Because most of us have probably been through junior high, right? Or going to a family dinner as an adult and gone, I love these people, but were they always this weird? Like, I don't know. Or you're just in a room where nobody understands what your motivation is, what your drive, what your dream is, right? And you feel like you're the only person in that room in the moment, even though you're talking to a bunch of people, right? And so the lesson. So each one of these will have a lesson. So isolation, what's the lesson? Junior high stinks? That's not it. No, the lesson is recognize and deal with isolation. As I said, we have people feeling isolated all around us, right? And that's one of the nice things is that you can actually do something about that, and you can actually, take the time to recognize that in people, if that's something that you're good at, and you can take the time to invite them into your world to feel less isolated, or more importantly, you can take the time to allow them to invite themselves into the world that they want to be in. And so it's really interesting trying to reflect on, the parallels between living in a bubble on a volcano and being out in the world. The next one is going to be confinement. And so I just have a little video. The music's a little cheesy. It's from a different thing. But it'll give you guys a sense. We'll go into the habitat and we'll give you kind of a sense.
This is the site of the high seas habitat, where crews live and work like astronauts would on Mars, in order to learn and prepare for long-duration interplanetary missions. Right now, Mission 5 is underway.
We'll give you a sense of the inside.
Come in and take a tour of our hab. Here's our workshop and storage container. It's attached to the airlock where we suit up and decompress to go outside.
There's a little watering plants there.
Over here past the bathroom is the lab, where the crew can work on their personal research.
Also have our medical supplies here.
Upstairs, we each have our own room. And here's the main area of the hab.
So you all work with veggie.
This is where we work, eat, exercise, have crew meetings, work on projects, and relax together.
You walk over to what we call the coffee shop, and you can ask me about that.
We're on our own here for 8 months. But we're not really alone. There's a team of people supporting the mission and the research.
Yeah, so the people at the end there were all part of our mission support team. Okay, so you see that the majority of our room, we had, some decent space, but the majority of it is in one connected room. So we can't really walk away from one another for too far. In everyday life, I can don and doff different masks, right? I can kind of put on my professional mask when I go to work. Then I can come home and I can take that off and put on my family mask or my friend's mask. Maybe at some point of the day, I put on my stranger's mask, meeting a new person. We can't do that in the habitat. Or we can, right? We can take off a mask, put on another one, but everybody sees the wardrobe change. Everybody sees that, right? And so what it means is that everything that I do affects every other aspect of my life. So if there's some conflict at work with one of my crewmates, when I come home, that's going to carry into exercise time and sitting at dinner together and personal time, right? Or if something's going wrong there, that's going to be hard to separate when you're out on EVA and you're, in a spacesuit and in a cave somewhere. And so you have this kind of constant feedback loop that's really important to pay attention to. The result of that is that you have to have certain things. One is very good conflict management. So if something happens, you have to be willing to come to the table and say, hey, there's an issue with this, can we talk about it? And you have to be willing to have an uncomfortable conversation. Sometimes in a group setting as well. Different personalities don't necessarily do that as well. So these are all people that want to go to space someday, right? That are trying to go to space someday. And so they don't like to complain. They're not the type. And so you have to create an environment where it's okay to share something that's wrong so you can tackle it. Do you have a question?
Could you speak louder, please?
Oh, sure, yeah. Did the mic shut off yet? Let's see. Try this again.
Brian, try stopping it. That's not.
Looks like this guy's not coming out. All right, call mission support. I can.
You should always take your own batteries with you, because I think this one is dead as well.
Okay, no worries. I can yell. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so the other thing we have to do really well is compartmentalize. So as I said, you might be, like in this picture, you might have crew members standing on a ledge where you have a 40-foot drop or 50-foot drop, and you're relying on the person in front of you to be on their best game. And they're relying on you for the same thing. So maybe you're just a little ticked off that they didn't do the dishes that morning, right? Or maybe there's a growing problem in the hab that just hasn't been resolved. And so you have to be able to put that aside.
It's
Whoa,
working.
that's right. That's David knows that failure is not an option.
You don't know me very well.
Corny? Corny space joke, okay. So you have to be able to put those things aside. You have to be able to take that, that frustration or whatever it is and put it aside so that you can do your job and then come back and address the problem. And that's the key thing too. You can't just walk away from it, right? That's the luxury that I have out here. If somebody's annoying me, I can just go over there. If I don't like you guys, I'll just go in the room and it'll be fine. Right? But if I want to have a good relationship, I have to come back and talk it out and be like, okay, what's the problem? Is your mic not working? Is my mic not working? Like, how can we fix this? Okay? See, no smell hours up there. So you get all kinds of interesting rules. One of the things that I used to like to do is wake up early in the morning and do some writing before my crew members got up, just because there was a little bit more personal time. And I would cook breakfast. And what I didn't know is that when I cooked breakfast, that scent was going up through one of the vents directly into somebody's room, and that was waking them up every morning. And eventually they expressed that to me. And so we ended up having no smell hours, right? Basically, we weren't supposed to cook between this hour and that hour, right? Or like we didn't talk top politics, which is something we set out before the mission. And so you end up coming up with all these kind of strange rules that are really just connected to your crew and your preferences and whatever is the thing, whatever is the thing that bugs you. In order to deal with confinement, we had to exercise 2 hours a day. And I put this slide in here because I thought there might be some aerospace engineers in here that are interested in habitat design. Because there's a lot of little interesting kinks that you can consider. One of them being sound isolation. So if you think of something like if you were sending a audio or a video recording to, let's say, a significant other or a doctor, and you feel that there's no sound isolation and that maybe your crew members can hear you, you're probably going to be less comfortable doing that. Or you're probably not going to be speaking as openly, right? Things like that. So you can have the best system set up in the world, the most private line, your communications could be great, you have your biomedical engineers set up all this great stuff. And if you don't have that in the habit, people aren't going to use it. They might just write instead, or you won't use the tools available. So there are interesting considerations to make. Another thing that was really important in dealing with these issues is culture. And this is an example I like to use to demonstrate the importance of culture. And I argue that literally everything comes down to culture. And if you don't believe me, we'll get coffee sometime. We'll have a conversation. But I grew up in a Portuguese household. Right? We spoke Portuguese, we ate Portuguese food, we wore really weird Portuguese clothes, all these different things. And I didn't realize how weird I was until friends came over. And this is just an example that I like to use, a little simple experiment. I Googled American rabbit. Okay, so you get a bunch of pictures of bunnies, they look all happy. Then I Googled French rabbit. Okay, still cute, floppy ears. And then I Googled Portuguese rabbit. My favorite part about this is the tags, just meat, leg, just... So you can see why my friends were running away screaming. Right? That's a cultural difference, but it matters. And in the habitat, we had to develop our own culture. Some of that was the rules we talked about, like no smell hours, right? Some of it is as simple as making sure to celebrate somebody's birthday and trying to make a cake out of the ingredients you have. Or having a paint night. Yeah. We also did stuff like open mic night, so people who brought their instruments would play music, or we would read a poem or share a story about our lives, right? And one thing that's maybe not so easy to tell from this is that, as you see that projector in the back where we watch movies, this is all the same space that we're doing all these things in. So every once in a while, you just have to reinvent the space that you have. And you don't have another space, so today it's a coffee shop. Tomorrow it's a paint place. Chuck E. Cheese, I don't know. You just have to change it up, maybe once a month, just to feel like you have somewhere different to go. So confinement. What are the lessons? If you don't like Bugs Bunny, don't come to my house for dinner. You'll be sad, your kids will cry, I'll have to apologize, it'll be awkward. Real lesson, recognize that our actions have butterfly effects. So, if I have an interaction with an individual, and it's positive, even if I don't have to see that person, they might go on and feel positive throughout the day, and their actions will be coordinated, connected with that. Or if it's negative, the same thing. They're ticked off, they're making opinions about myself or the people I represent, whatever it is, and then that's carrying it. Or more immediately, if I'm upset at work and I bring that home, that's going to affect things. And it does. You know, there's always a little bit of that, right? It's hard to fight that. Or vice versa. So in the habitat, it's not much different. We just take our world and we shrink it down to this tiny little space with just 6 people. So you can't avoid any of that. If you have a conflict, there's no not seeing that person, right? And so it's the same concept, we just have a faster feedback loop. And so we have to deal with things more immediately. Also say build positive culture. That's very, very important. On a team, set rules and expectations early. That's very important because they're very difficult to change later on. And then aim for flexibility, but you have to do it as a team. What I mean by that is you want to be adaptable to different challenges, but you also have to do it in a way that everybody's invested. And that only happens if you do it as a whole team. Communication delays. So this is the fun one. We're on 20-minute communication delays. So that means if I say, hi guys, how are you? And you say, good, Brian, how are you? That took 40 minutes. Okay? 20 minutes to get to you, 20 minutes to get back to me. Plus the amount of time that it takes to get you, to get whatever answer it is. So if we have a problem and we need something from the ground, and either I do a bad job of expressing what it is I need, or they, don't get the right thing, that's another hour added to your problem, which you can imagine would be a big issue if you're, actually in space and maybe there's a life-threatening situation and you need some help with it. And that has an interesting effect on ground crew interactions. Now I know you guys have a lot of astronauts speak here, right? I've had a couple astronauts come. I urge you to ask them, what do they think life in space would be like with these communication delays? I've only gotten asked one or two. A lot of them kind of say, well, we don't have to talk to ground all the time. That sounds awesome. Let's do it. Sign me up, right? So it's an important thing to recognize that there are some positives, but also negatives, and those two things are important considerations. Now, as a result of the communication delays, we also don't have Google, we don't have Skype, we don't have constant connection to anything. Even our medical conferences with our doctors are done through writings or recordings that we record and then send off and then wait, the 20 minutes to get to them. And you can see these pictures, like if something breaks, like we're the ones to fix it, that's it. Sometimes we need that information from ground to do it, or the permission from ground. What it also means is that we didn't use social media. So nobody's tweeting from the volcano, from the habitat. And we're not getting news, sort of. We could get news. So the ground can send up, a PDF with the latest headlines from whatever news source we wanted. And then we can say, okay, I want this headline, I want this headline. And they could send that. So that's 2 hours right there. So a little bit more active. I didn't do any of that. I wanted to make sure that I wanted to step out entirely. I really wanted to disconnect from all the stuff that I had in my daily life and just see what that, what the difference was at the end. When I say it out loud, it kind of feels like I'm treating myself like a lab rat. After we got out, there was a bunch of news articles about us and news things about us, and I like this one. It says, you guys can read it. 6 researchers emerged after 8 months of complete isolation from all the news. Everybody else runs back in. Right? So you see this and like, what did you guys do? What did you do to my world? Right? And it's a silly cartoon, but it really expressed how people were feeling, or at least that's how I perceived it. Right? I would go just talk to people and they'd go, man, the world's falling apart. Everything's terrible. Thank gosh you were in there. You missed all the worst stuff. And I was like, could I just have a glass of water and hang out? I've been away for a while. Right? And you could see the effect that all the passive, constant media had on everybody else, whereas we were just focused on the people in front of us. Just, is he okay? Is Jay all right? And so it was just a different focus when you paid more attention to the things that are just in front of you. In addition to this, there were a bunch of really great news articles written about us. They were all very positive, or at least very informative. And I'm not going to show you guys any of those. I want to show you guys one that I just think is funny. Because, you see, 6 people just completed a NASA isolation experiment that emerged to the dumpster fire that is 2017. So, this was the exception to the rule, but again, kind of drives in the point. It didn't seem like everybody was super happy and we were disconnected from that. Yeah, I also like stuck up a volcano. Just, great word choice. So communication, what is the lesson? 2017 was a dumpster fire. Yeah, I thought 2016 was bad, you know? It was Bowie and Prince, but I guess this is worse. The actual lesson is focus on the people in front of you. At least that's what, you know, I took away from it. Right? If I start paying attention to all the things that are telling me what I think and what I feel, I start going crazy, right? More than being in a bubble. But if you focus on the people in front of you, you realize, oh, I can connect with all of these people on some level. And I can disagree with these people on some level and also still like them and, you know, develop relationships with these people. And so that was a really important thing that I got out of it from, you know, from that extreme. Now, communication is really important inside the habitat, also between crew members, especially on EVA. So EVA is any time we're stepping outside of our habitat. So anytime you see an actual astronaut in space, in a spacesuit, they're on EVA. It takes quite a bit of time. So typically we would be given some geological challenge, something to study. Maybe there's some shadow rings, there's some interesting feature that they want us to, you know, do something with or figure something out about. And so we'd spend a day planning out what we were going to do, how are we going to tackle this challenge, who's going to do what, how are we going to do it, what tools are we going to bring, what tools are we going to make to bring. And then we'd plan it out, actually rehearsing it, so actually walking through the motions and make sure everybody fully understood where they were going to go because you're limited on time. And then there was the execution day. So the morning of, we'd be getting up, you're gathering supplies. So you see some of the supplies here. This is actually, see them on the table, this is probably one of the, you know, more rigorous hikes, so we set it up ahead of time. But we get our supplies, we get our medical kits, our radios, make sure everything had batteries, GoPros, because we film everything for the research. Suit up, you do kind of like a fake, you know, airlock cycle, and then HabCom, which is the person who sits inside the habitat, tells you you can go out, and they keep in communication with the crew. They have to be in communication with the crew the entire time. It's one of the rules. One of the coolest things that we get to do on these EVAs is explore lava tube caves. And so basically underneath the ground in these lava fields are caves that have been formed by flowing lava. And actually if you go to Hawaii now, you can go to a place where lava is currently flowing underground and constantly pouring into the ocean. And it's really, really cool. And you can see it from the ocean, but if you're adventurous, you can hike the other way and you can actually see at night it bursts from the ground in certain places and you see the lava coming out and activate it. It's really, really interesting. So underneath here, these aren't obviously flowing anymore, but they've left caves behind. And in some of these lava tube caves, the ceiling has collapsed. And they've collapsed in a way that allows you entry in. You can climb down and climb into it. And so what we do is we go ahead and scout for these skylights. We find one that we can actually enter, and then we can go in and explore it and see if it's actually accessible. So you see one of the skylights here. Some of them are easier to get into. You can walk in and, you know, trek your way through. Some are not so easy to get in, and you can't be claustrophobic. You have to, you know, kind of crawl through and squeeze in. It wasn't for everybody. And then one of the other interesting things is, this is, I'm just shining the flashlight on one of the crew members, and in certain parts of these caves you get total darkness. So essentially, if you're looking at your hand, and you close your eyes, you won't see a difference between your eyes being open and your eyes being closed. No light that gets in. It's really eerie in a very cool way. Just a couple more pictures from EVA. You see us walking up the ridge. This is typically a trek that we'd have to take right outside the habitat. It's right outside where we leave to go up on top of the ridge. Again, climbing down into another lava tube cave here to just see what was there. And then I have just a couple videos, show the landscape a little bit. So these we weren't filming for the actual footage, we were just scouting. So we're taking a look and you can see, okay, we got a big skylight here, let's take a look at it. Does it look like we could get in, you know, without, you know, trying to save the time of actually going and hiking up there. You see another skylight out here, okay, this might be a possibility. And so you're gonna kind of actually take out your drone and save yourself a little bit of time. And it's a nice middle ground between looking at, you know, maps and, you know, actually spending the time to walk out there. This was taken on a crater that's right at the edge of where we stayed. You can see some lava there that had poured into it previously during polar flow. Mauna Kea in the back there. So that's just following the lava channel. You see the lava channel, you see a little lava island, we call it. You see a contact point between two flows, so one flowing over the other. You have different lava types, so you have lava, which is a big pain to walk over, and Pohoi lava, which is a little bit smoother, and then it depends on the physics of what was going on while it was cooled. And that actually affects how we plan our EVAs quite a bit, because some of the terrain is just going to take us 2-3 times as long. Now after EVA is done, we're all really hungry, so that's the next thing. And we had shelf-stable food, but this is kind of the more interesting stuff. So you see chicken, you see that's what egg is, cheese, we have some different meats and salmon. So you just have different foods that you would rehydrate, and then that would be your ingredients to make whatever it is that you want to make. The other thing we did for food was grow plants. So a couple of the crew members were growing things. You see the garden on the left-hand side. You see peas in the center. It's amazing how excited you get for a pea like 4 months into this thing. And sometimes we just had one, and somebody would cut it into 6 individual slices. It's super fun. But yeah, it was actually, it boosts morale quite a bit. You also see, flowers, and you go, well, what's the utility of that? And it's simply, you're surrounded by rock all the time. And it's kind of nice to just see a flower or see something, Earth-like, I guess. And it gives you something to care for. Like, crew members that crew stuff really enjoy it. How do we make sure that we don't run out of food? And we have resupply, or as we call it, HAB Christmas. So during HAB Christmas, or before HAB Christmas, actually, we would look through the food that we have, the stuff that we're using the most. We'd look through our inventory, and we'd create a list of things that we need and things that we want as well. Sometimes this is equipment. And we would get a resupply every 2 months. So a month ahead of time, we would send off this list, and then things would get approved or not approved, and then dropped off at a later date. And then we would have to do an EVA, go out and get the things, bring it back in, and we'd spend the afternoon unpacking, inventorying them, and then putting them away. So usually you lost a weekend or half a week into this. Resource management, so we had to manage our resources pretty well. We generated all of our own solar power. We had hydrogen fuel cell backups, as well as propane generator as backup. We had to manage our water as well. And we did all this using a program called Uilla. So if you take a look at Uilla here, we can get a lot of the telemetry from our systems here. We can see our battery percentage power. We can see how much we're generating, how much we're consuming. You can see what our water level is at. You can take a look at things like wind speed if we're going to go fly the drone. We had a bunch of stuff, CO2 sensors. We had the temperature, and then you can click on these guys, and it'll actually bring up a plot, and you can see some trending data, and you can kind of get an idea of what the cloud coverage is and how much you're probably going to generate, and get an idea of what your plan is for the day. Can we cook a big dinner? How much power can we use for that? Can we have the event or whatever it is that we wanted to do, or run the research project that we needed to do? Things like that. And so we talked about what's coming in. We need to talk about what's coming out. So the toilets. So we're looking at the toilets. We actually had compost toilets. So do your business. You have a mixture of basically like peat moss and like wood shavings. Put them in there. We also would have to use like a microbe spray. Turn it every now and then once a week, 2 crew members were tasked with going in, emptying some of it out into a bag, picking it up and going, what did you guys eat this week? Right? And then going downstairs, I know it's gross, putting it into a box, and then we'd have to EVA it out later. Welcome to Mars. It's weird. It's okay. So in addition to all the science and all the research that we did, we also did outreach. This is something that I'm very, very proud of, something that was really important to our crew specifically. We don't have any requirement to do any of this stuff. we did a bunch of things. We were on a Japanese game show. We were in a documentary, a Swedish TV show, a bunch of news networks. On the Exploration Station TV show with Emily, who had an incredible crew that were just super professional and polite. And what I really liked was the New York Times left me with a bunch of 360-degree cameras and asked me to film throughout the mission because nobody can be there while we're there. And so if you go online and you actually search up Life on Mars, you'll see an episodic series about our mission, which is very, very interesting. It's something that I was just personally proud of to be able to film for those guys and record. Eventually, the mission comes to an end. Can't be fun forever. I remember the moment that I felt that the mission was over, and it was before we left. It was actually, I heard the sound of a car tire, like, on gravel, and then a car door closing. I was like, oh, that's weird, this is done. Just like normal human sounds that you just haven't heard. We had a countdown, and then we all walked out from being in isolation with just the 6 of us for 8 months to being in a sea of cameras and microphones, which is pretty jarring. Beforehand, our crew had a lot of little emotional moments and talking to one another. Except one crew member was very serious. He held it together very well. And then he walked out, and there was a breakfast table set up and a pile of McMuffins. And it was the first time I'd seen him shed a tear the entire mission. So we all deal with things differently. But they were all telling him we should go for sponsorship. The first thing we had to do was actually have a press conference. And the only thing I really wanted to do was take a picture of the press taking pictures of me. So I did, and you see them there before they actually got started. And you see our crew member ruining everything like normal. But that was actually a lot of fun. We'll go and talk about it afterwards. But it doesn't end there. We have a post-mission debrief. So we go back to this ranch, we sit with all the researchers, we tell them about what happened during the mission, they probe us with questions, they'll have different researchers from different projects that were in there, go and ask us questions, how did it go, what could be improved, just so they get all that data fresh in our minds right after the mission. Returning home can be pretty overwhelming the first time you walk into a store and have to deal with a stranger, or let's say go into a bar and there's 20 TV screens with all different things going on, and everybody's on their phone and nobody's watching the same thing or talking to each other. It can be very jarring when you've just been in a place where nobody ever had a phone because you can't use it. There's no need for it. Or you walk into a bar and somebody tries to cut your tie off. I don't know. You're just not prepared for these things.
Sorry for that.
Oh, no worries. It's the discovery, that's the fun part. And so, speaking of that, actually, so one of the things I did first was type top country songs. I just want to listen to something that was familiar. And then I realized I don't recognize any of this music. I don't know anything that's on the radio. I picked up, this little toy, and I was like, what is this? I've seen this everywhere. What is this? And people are going, what are you talking about? You haven't seen this? That's incredible. It's a fidget spinner, right? One of my favorite things is that somebody tried describing a fidget spinner to my brother, my older brother, and they said, oh, it's something that calms your kid down. And he said, oh, I got one of those. It's called mowing the lawn. It's my brother. So, post-mission, the lessons. So this is more lessons that, I try to take back with me. How many of you have spent a significant amount of time in a different country, long enough where you kind of integrate into the culture a little bit? Okay, so quite a bit of you, right? So, I probably don't have to tell you that a lot of times the hardest part about that, and the culture shock, the hardest part of culture shock, is coming back. It's not going there, it's coming back, especially if it's drastically different cultures. And the reason is that you pick up all kinds of, ways of living that are different, that you feel improve your life or are better ways of living. And then you bring those back, and they directly conflict with the culture that you're coming back to. And so then you're left with two options, right? You either isolate yourself, you become the weird person, because how could you live without a phone or a car or, all these things, or whatever it is. Or you reintegrate into that culture, and you're giving up things that make your life better. Right? And so there's this kind of weird dynamic. And this wasn't really any different. I try to hold on to some of the things that were good. and the habitat. People ask you, what do you miss? And really what I'm focused on is what was good that I want to keep. Things like limiting social media. Like I have blocks on my computer so that I can't spend much time on there, kind of thing. Focusing on the people in front of me. Conflict resolution, something that I talked about earlier. If something is, an issue, going to a friend or a coworker or whatever, and just being able to have that conversation and just going, okay, where are you at? This is what I'm thinking, and this is kind of what's not working. How can we fix this? How can we work together? And it makes a huge improvement on your life. If you're willing to not just walk away and take the time to yourself, but also to walk back and talk things up. So mission summary, we had 6 people go in, 6 people come out. Not 5, not 7, we had 6. So, thousands and thousands of surveys, a ton of data, almost a year's worth of data. The researchers are going to be going through this for a long time. You'll see the research papers start coming out in the next year or 2. And so we hope that the data that we produced will actually help them to better understand what some of the challenges are, and what some of the mitigations could be and how they work. And so we'll find out and we'll see what comes out of that. So why go, right? Why go to space? Or why stick people in a plastic bubble for 8 months? Or do any of this sort of stuff? The way I like to answer that is pretty simple. I think every one of us here has had a time in their lives where, we look up at the sky, or, you're aggravated and maybe you slam the door and you walk outside and you breathe in that cold air, or this is Houston, so I guess you breathe in that humid air, whatever it is, breathe in that air, you look up at the sky, right, and you think, what the hell is this for? Why am I here? What is the point? What is it that I'm doing? And we all have this, all these basic human questions that we all ask, right? Are we alone? Are we alone here? But we look up, right? And we can go. We can build rockets. We'll always have people courageous enough to sit on those rockets and go somewhere, right? We'll have the person that raised their hand and say, sure, I'll go, right? You'll always have those individuals. So I say, let's go look. Let's go. More importantly, for the individuals, what I want to say is, we should all try to get outside of our comfort zone. And that might mean, supporting space. But that could also mean, hopping on a plane and going somewhere where the people don't look like you, or act like you, or live like you. Or maybe trying something new, learning an instrument. Or maybe living in a plastic tent and pooping out a toilet once a week. Whatever it is. And more importantly, for the explorers in the room, you know who you are. For the explorers in the room, it's your responsibility to get outside of your bubble. Because I guarantee you, we all live in a bubble. I live in a bubble now, still. You guys live in some sort of bubble. So for the explorers, it's your responsibility to get outside that bubble. Go see what's out there, learn about it, figure out what it is, and then bring it back to the individuals that are unwilling or unwanting to leave theirs. And Brian, thank you very much for your time.
This is your time. Questions for Brian, please. And I'll bring the microphone to you so that we can hear your questions.
Really enjoyed your lecture. One of the questions I have is, were you and your team tested beforehand to select people who had a chance of being compatible? And second of all, did you go through any kind of training or team building to kind of check that out instead of waiting for they come?
Yeah. So the first question is a little bit of a two-part answer. So the question is, did we have any sort of selection to see if we're compatible, right? So the specific details we don't know a lot about, because we're not supposed to know about it because it's a research project. But the selection process was something of the sort, from my perspective. The first part was kind of just a resume, what are your skills, essays, things like that. Then we had psychological tests, so ask you a bunch of weird questions and give you all these time limits and that sort of thing. And then we had like an interview, but it wasn't with another person. It would give you a certain amount of time and you have to record your answer and just send that out. And those were kind of the three phases. For the training, we had about a week. So we all got together in Hawaii, it wasn't a lot of time, on the ranch where we do debrief. And we all just learned how to run all the research experiments, mostly. A little bit on how to live in that and how to do EVA. But that was actually a tiny portion of it. Most of it was just, this is how you conduct the research, because that's what, that's where the money's from. And so we had about a week's on, plus, some Skype sessions before and things like that. So not a lot of time. In hindsight, it was a little crazy.
Did they choose you for compatibility, or did they, on purpose, try to create a little bit of...
It's hard to say, because, on our side, we're not allowed to know the specific details of that. So, I do know that they try to pick a different, a lot of different skill sets. They want a lot of tools in the toolbox, is what they always say. So if you see, we all had different backgrounds. And so it was interesting because we'd have a challenge for one of the geological tasks, we got to design it. And so what we did was okay, let's make a 3D model of the ridge that we lived on. And so, a couple of us flew the drone, took images. Laura used to, program for Google, so she could create the program that would crunch all the numbers, and then somebody else who worked CAD, doing the 8500 race car stuff, could transfer that. I was doing the 3D printing, and we could use all of those skill sets that we had built up. So, from the perspective, I'm sure that they picked us for very specific reasons in terms of professions and backgrounds. I'm not so sure about personalities. That'd be a question for the researchers.
What's the age limit?
I don't believe there is one. There is one. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for sharing your experiences with us.
Yeah.
I wonder what were the research discoveries, the scientific discoveries from this experience, and how do you think this is going to improve the future missions through all the planets?
Yeah. So again, a lot of the research isn't out yet. So that 8 months was just producing all of that data, all these surveys, all these things. But we literally have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of GoPro footage and surveys and all these things. So right now, really, the researchers are going through that data. And so the publications, the conclusions from those haven't been published yet. And that's something that we'll see probably in the next year, maybe 2 years, depending. What it'll result in, I don't know until I see the conclusions, but we hope that each one gives them a better understanding of what it's like and what some of the team dynamics are, how that can change, and then hopefully some feedback on the tools that they put in there to help those situations. They'll see, okay, this works, this doesn't really work. Is this just doesn't work in an analog, it might work in space, they'll start figuring those things out.
Hi, my next question is, so you mentioned the skylights in the volcano, and I was just wondering were you guys really scared? And you mentioned a team that verified, that was your support system. Did they verify those sites before you got in there, or was that just...
Could you repeat the second part of the question?
You mentioned that you guys had a support team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the support team, I was just wondering, did they verify those sites before you got there, or did you guys just get the drone and you said, hey, I'll go to that site and just head for it?
Yeah, so as far as that, so for the ground didn't verify the sites. So we would either take the drone or we would go out and look. We could pull up maps, satellite imagery, and look to see what was around and put a pinpoint, throw it in the GPS, and we could plan an EVA to go out and check them out. As far as whether people were scared, I can't answer for anybody. I had a ball. For me, it was one of the most exciting things. It's not for everybody. It does get claustrophobic. First of all, you're in this suit that just kind of compresses, and you are still in Hawaii, so it's hard to breathe sometimes. And then you're also kind of climbing under some rocks. So some of us spent more time in the latitude caves than others. Myself and one other two of the crew members. We would go out quite a bit on our free time when we had those approved to go and explore, but not everybody did.
What's the minimum basic education? Do you have a PhD?
No, I believe you have to have some sort of technical background, at least a bachelor's. Yeah, I think that was the minimum. Nothing too crazy.
We have a message in the YouTube chat that is pineapple grind, so do you have any shout-outs for anybody?
What is it?
We have a message in the YouTube chat that says pineapple grind, so do you have any shout-outs?
Oh. Yes, a shout out to my nephew Colton. I love you and miss you. And to my younger brothers, Jonathan, Javian. On the back?
I'm going to give it back.
Okay.
Well, thanks to everybody who's listening online. I'm glad that somebody like that.
I'm just trying to see how many times I can make you run around. With that one.
Are you still my phone?
Well, I was wondering, at any time during the 8 months, for like any time during the 8 months, were people contemplating leaving, or is that an option? And if not, what were some ways that people try to get some space from everyone else?
Yeah, that's a good question. We could leave if we wanted. We're volunteers, they don't hold us captive against the world or anything like that. But everybody went in there extremely dedicated. It was actually a conversation we had before. What would make you leave? What do you think would be the only time you ever consider leaving? And there were extreme cases where people brought it. So no, I don't think anybody ever actually considered leaving. You might go, this really stinks. I don't know, tomorrow's going to stink, and I don't know what's going to be after the next day, right? But you don't ever want to open that door because you're there to, see what you're made of. Something, like I said, these people are all people that want to fly. They're not people who give up easy. They're people that might have a hard time, but they'll work through it. So I'd say no to that question. And then how do people get space? It depended. We all had different personalities. One of the things you saw in there really briefly in the video where there's a tour in the swing around, the very first place where we store the food, it's kind of like, it's got metal walls, so it's the most sound isolated place. Sometimes people will go in there if they really needed space and they need to like play some music or do something. A lot of times you just kind of like go to your room. Actually, I have a picture of the rooms. Here it is. So your rooms aren't huge, but it's, it's decent, okay space. The ceilings actually come down, so by the time you're over your bed, the ceiling's like here, your bed's here. And so you don't have a ton of room. You have a little like seat that can slide under this desk, and this desk's about this big. But everybody kind of just understood if you're in your room, that means kind of leave it alone. Yeah, unless you had some research that you had to go on and do, then people would come and grab it. So people would do that. Try to find your own space in that time as best you could, which is really just the bedrooms and that canister there.
Hey, this is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this outreach. This is really great. What personal objects were you allowed to bring? And maybe this is more researcher side, but what was the logic in being able or not being able to bring certain objects?
Okay. They didn't give us any like crazy restrictions on anything. No alcohol was one thing. They were very clear that we couldn't make it in there either. There's scientists and engineers who we figured out that you cannot make it, can't bring it. Other than that, you had one suitcase that you could bring basically. So most of us just brought clothes, maybe a couple of reminders from home, but that's about it. They supplied most everything, and you kind of just go like, how do you pack for this? I have no idea what I need. So you're like, okay, I got a picture of my little brothers and my nephew Colton, and that's about it. And some clothes, and that's it. So I think it was more personal what people brought. I brought some items for for activities, so like paint night. I actually brought that stuff. Just like I knew we were at some point we were going to want to do something that was different. But it's different for everybody.
Just how hard was it inside the suit? That's number one. And two, how did you make laundry?
What was the
How did you make laundry?
Well, laundry, we actually had washing machines. Yeah, that's a good point.
And the first one was about spacesuit.
Yeah.
How hot was inside?
Oh, it got really hot. So we actually had fans. If you look at the picture that I shown before with all the equipment,
through that. And also, for some of the puzzles and challenges that you guys have given, was there anything like a simulation of, say, sensors failing or solar panels being down, or anything that was programmed, part of the schedule? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Okay, so for the most part, they tell us that stresses aren't forced on us. Their kind of philosophy there is, over 8 months, you're going to get stressed. Things are going to break, storms are going to happen. It's just enough time when things go wrong. And they say, we don't need to reduce that. So, to our knowledge, there wasn't any of that or a lot of that anymore. As far as the storm, first we do everything we can on our side. So we see, is it our connection? We have our IT going and focusing on the things that she knows. Are our systems up? Or, the dish that bounces the signal up? We check the wiring in the back. We check the network. Is it everybody's computer? Or the IP set up right? All that stuff. And then, once you realize, okay, this has to be on the other end. You just have to wait. And that's kind of the point. And it was something that was knocked down on their side that took down both lines. There's not a lot you can do. You can't rebuild internet there. So at that point, you do it again. You do all the research work that you can. You make sure that your battery backups are up and working. So you take care of that stuff first. You make sure that that you're set up and you do as much work as you can. You get the lights out. That night we were sitting there in the dark with our headlamps, and one of the crew members were looking out at the empty lava field with no communication, and he said, "There are no rules anymore." I realized how riots started. I was very scared.
Hi, thanks. What did you do for managing your water resources? Cooking, drinking, laundry, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we had a lot of talks about that. So our lead engineer, Ansley, was in charge of that. So he set certain limits. We had 7 minutes? I think it was 7 minutes. 7 or 8. I think it's 7 minutes to shower every week. It's all the time. So you have to manage that however you please. I like the reactions there. Manage it however you please. You can do one shot, 7 minutes. You can do a minute a day. It's up to you. You could also, wipe down, use the sink, that kind of thing. We had to develop a system basically for doing dishes. We kept track of the water as best we could. There was one scenario where basically we hadn't had water for quite a while. And I think it was actually the supply, so the water actually gets resupplied as well. And the supply hadn't come, and they didn't know how the supply was going to come. It was something to do with, whatever the company supplying was just wasn't there. They didn't have enough one. And we got an email, and it said, the water truck is coming. Everybody got, okay, let's get all the water we can, because the tank's going to get filled up. And so we're running around. People are filling up buckets and filling things up and draining the tanks. I can see, yes, it's a terrible idea. I sat back and recorded it. It's one of my private records. And then 40 minutes later, again, because that communication delay, somebody else must have saw the email, flagged it, and realized, oh, this is a miscommunication. They said, oh, just to be clear, they're just coming to take a look. And so we had drained like 100 gallons, in this super short amount of time. And so that's where communication is extremely important. Word choice and context is very, very important.
So I'm sort of aware of at least 4 more questions, and maybe I did maybe 5. So if you put your hands out, I know we're coming here next. And I know there was a, so okay. I have to feed this guy, remember. Okay, so I'm going to do a zigzag. Everybody who just hit their hand up will get a question. 1, 2, you've had your hand up around 3, 4, 5. You can have the last one in the red shirt. Oh, no, red shirt, and then you can have the last one in the green shirt. And then we'll stick a fork in it. So.
I appreciate all the questions, Carl. This is fantastic.
Hi, thank you again for making this presentation. It's really interesting. One of the things I had a question about is you mentioned early on about relationships between the crew members.
Yeah.
Did you find that relationships always came to an equilibrium, or were they constantly dynamic?
It depended on the relationship. So some of them were more dynamic than others. I think from my perspective, sometimes the people that you were close to were more dynamic, because you rely on each other so much. So little things have a bigger effect, just like in any other relationship. Some of them equalize a little bit. If you, for example, had more difficult time connecting with someone, you kind of go, we rub each other the wrong way. I don't know why. You don't know why, but we know it happens, and we want to work through that. That works. And when you say equilibrium, that's kind of what comes to mind. You can actually get through that. You can be like, I don't know what it is, we don't connect, but we can make it work, as long as both people are committed. So I'd say a little bit of both.
Yeah, so, hi, thank you. This has been fantastic, so enlightening. So this might be a little private, but you said you journaled every morning, and I'm wondering how much of what you journaled and how much of your headspace in its entirety was focused on the here and now and what you were experiencing at the site, and how much of you was kind of thinking about, man, what's happening to my family and your ambitions for when you got back, and how much of you was there and how much of you was somewhere else?
I see. A lot of me was there. I mean, part of my personal motivation for traveling to a new place and doing something that's completely different from what I've been doing before, getting a bubble, is that it forces you to be present. You know, a lot of times it's really easy to be thinking about, you know, the past or the future, you know, where you want to be, where you've been, and, you know, where I did wrong or I did right, whatever it is. If I just drop you in the middle of, you know, a country you've never been to, guess what? You're going to be there. Your mind is going to be there, you know? How do I get to where I need to be? Where do I talk to this person? And you have a lot more, you can experience that immediate joy a little more. So I say in the habitat, you know, obviously I thought about my family and I reached out to them and, you know, we communicated as much as possible. But a lot of it was in the moment. You know, what am I feeling now? And you'd have kind of interesting things, like we watched a movie on Yuri's Night about Yuri Gagarin, like a documentary that the Mission Control had sent us. And then you're thinking about exploration. You sleep that night and you have like a weird dream and you're writing about it. And that's one of the things on the blog. So a lot of it you connect it to, yeah, what is life like here? And how is that affecting me? And how will I be when I get out? Yeah.
Hi, this is all really, really cool. At the beginning, you talked about the analog, and you talked a lot about how you made that fit. Could you maybe touch on the shortcomings of the analog, what you weren't able to simulate?
Sure. So one thing you'll notice is that it's, as I said, it's a psychological study, right? So we're not really focused on hardware. So we can get away with, you know, big plastic hazmat suits because you're not going to learn how a spacesuit moves from that. You're not going to get hardware information. What you're going to do is make sure that you're always isolated, right? So when we go outside, I don't feel the wind on my face, right? I don't smell the air around me. I'm constantly disconnected from my surroundings, and that's kind of the point. So I say one of the things is just hardware, you know, and it's more of, it's less of a shortcoming, but more of just, you know, it's not what it's meant for. Other things are, you know, we're not really in danger the same way that somebody, you know, on Mars would be. You know, if something happens there, there's no turning around and coming back. You know, we ultimately can walk out into it. So you do eliminate that, you know, the level of fear that I wouldn't know what it was like. And you just kind of replace it with, I don't want to be the one who walks out that door. And it's not the same, but yeah, it's certainly a limitation.
How do you go from Earth to destination? What's the most?
Sorry, we have to, excuse me, ma'am. We have to work our way through. People can wait patiently, please.
If you come up after, I'm happy to, happy to answer some questions, definitely.
Yeah. Hopefully I would remind the same question. So our excellent presentation. My question would be, I was interested in your emphasis on the 20-minute delay communication. Was it designed to simulate the real scenario in Mars? And also, how did you manage that? Like, was there a procedure or protocol like, how to manage the communication?
Yeah. As far as, is that to simulate the same as Mars? Kind of. I believe the actual numbers are something like anywhere from 4 to 24 minutes, something like that, depending on, you know, where you are in the orbit. But yeah, we didn't have a dynamic one. It was just steady 20 minutes all the time to put, you know, that stress rate, I suppose. Protocol, some things, like in the morning we'd have to send a response. We'd say, hey, you know, rather say, hey, good morning, we say, hey, good morning, let's just say, okay, we have a connection. And every now and then you'd want to ping them. You have protocols for things like when you go on EVA, you know, they want to get a response every so often. Right? Crew's here, they're all okay, they're inside the cage, they got out, they're back in. So you have to constantly be updating on as much as you possibly can. As far as actually talking, like what to include, there wasn't any protocol. But that was something that our crew worked hard to do, to put in there. We did make requests, and some things were more successful than others. But because a lot of miscommunications, or you know, if things aren't available, you get very frustrated. So you go, okay, well, how do we fix this? We need more full context, or we need, you know, what are we doing wrong, and what can you guys, you know, this is what you guys can do better on our part. And so try to kind of build those, but you know, some of it's more successful than others. Nothing from the get-go, though. I can make it.
Hey, Brian. First of all, you wouldn't be my mission. Appreciate that. Second, question.
Get him out. Get him out.
What was your mental approach when you went into that? Did you have any regrets when you were actually there?
My mental approach. Okay. I have this memory ingrained in my head. I was climbing up. It sounds so corny. I was climbing up, actually a volcano, in Nicaragua, right? And I remember it was one of the toughest like hikes that I had done, which is not that it's really extreme. I'm just out of shape. So I'm about halfway up, and you know everybody's struggling. And I remember stopping, and I remember just looking back and just taking a moment to look at the path and at the site that we had, which is another volcano on an island. And it was gorgeous. And I had this picture up. And I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at what's behind me, and I have a single thought, which is just, it's so easy to focus on just like, you know, your feet, or just like the climb. You know, I'm gonna have to climb all these stairs to get to that door. Right? I have so much to go. It winds, and then there's more of a path. Right? You're always looking up, or you're looking down, and you're trying not to think about that, right? But you don't have a lot of time where you just turn around and go, oh, I made it that far. Like I was there, like an hour ago. Right? So I try to go into that mentality the same way. It's like, try not to focus on how much you have left, you know, and all the challenges that you have ahead. Focus on how far you made it. You know, take that next step, make sure you're not tripping on stuff, but look back every once in a while and go, oh, that's gorgeous. Oh, like, look at all, you know, look at the results of, you know, the sweat and this challenge that's behind me. That's what's fun.
Hey, Brian.
Hey.
Okay, so I promise this is good. Question. So with you guys being the fifth group to take part in high seas, is there a ritual leaving something behind for the next crew, or?
Okay. Be careful how I answer that. To my understanding, you're not supposed to leave anything behind to the next crew. As a matter of fact, some of the things that we had in there, they'll actually move out. Things that we created, added, even if it improved things, they want it to be the same, right? Because it's psychological stuff, and we don't want to screw that up either. That being said, we did leave something behind. You know, secretly. It got discovered before the mission, though. It was a no-go, but we had a really clever plan. I'll tell you about it.
Take all the W's off the keyboard.
Yeah.
Okay, last formal question, please.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Fabulous. Really think you made it relatable. All of us. So I think it's opportune. My question for Lawson. Speaking of scope of focus, I'm trying to think of like big scale and like where this fits in with I don't know the next few decades of space exploration. So what is learned from this as a psychological study? How it's applied, or was this supposed to, you know, simulate a future Martian base or something like that?
Yeah. So as I said, with high seas, it's mostly the psychological aspect, right? So I don't know exactly what their criteria was. I know that there was criteria for, let's say, our personalities and the way we react to things, and our backgrounds. And they're going to look at that and say, okay, did this work? Was this better than the last mission? Did more problems come up? Or not necessarily how many more problems came up, but how do they deal with the problems? Was that better? And so the idea is that you start to inform how you select your astronauts. You want people that are the same, you select them in the same way as you would, you know, the astronauts that are going out for something that's longer and, you know, just has different challenges. Do you want different personality types? Do you want a bunch of alphas in there? Do you want like a diverse group? Do you want a group that has similar backgrounds? You know, looking at those kind of aspects. Other analogs will be looking at some of the hardware, which is important. So even with us, if you go out to lava fields, like I have shoes that are just like completely wrecked, holes in them, just from walking. You know, not that far. So if it sounds like a silly, trivial thing, but like once you start doing these, you go, oh, like this type of lava wreaks havoc. So you want to make sure if you're in a spacesuit and you're on another planet, like your boots aren't going to be worn through. And so I actually asked that at the Advanced Spacesuit Lab that they have at JC, and they said, you know, that's a big concern, but it's one piece at a time. So now they're focused on a particular part. Then when they get funding, they'll start looking at those type of things. So, yeah. Yeah, astronaut selection. What happens in an isolated environment? That's a big question. So, like I was talking about the hair and spit samples, they can see, okay, are people always, you know, maximally stressed at the 3/4 mark or halfway, or did that change with our crew dynamic? So they'll actually pull all of those different data points together and come up with conclusions. You know, who we are, but also how stressed we were, how do we work together as a team, do we correlate, you know, like they can compare all that stuff. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you made it back for the Astros win at least. Anyway, please join me in thanking Brian.
For inviting me. I brought some mission patches. I don't know if there's enough for everybody, but you can reach out to me and hopefully I can get you one if you don't get one today. So come on and grab it. Feel free to ask questions. And yeah, thanks for showing up.
And enjoy your summer and hopefully we'll see you.